Tan Nguyen, she is absolutely unclassifiable. And that makes her strong. Graduate from the School of Min and the European Institute of Business Administration, began her career in major groups, becoming the first woman associate directors of McKinsey in France, and then strategic directors of the Suez Ondeo Group. She then founded the Ingenius Institute, an incubator for initiatives and ideas in the service for sustainable development, convinced that it is from collective intelligence that social and environmental innovation will emerge. It will now strive to freely disseminate knowledge, to pollinate knowledge, by drawing inspiration from open source models and the collaborative economy. It is the same spirit that she published the book Des abeilles et des hommes, Passerelle pour un monde libre et durable, aux éditions Fayard en 2010. In 2017, she published Le Manifeste des crapauds fous. Actually, I didn't translate it. Maybe we'll translate it. I don't know how to translate the crapaud fou, the full frog, I don't know. The Manifesto of the Full Frog, Mad Frog, I don't know, was published. An appeal she made to each citizen to respond to the three major dangers she saw facing our civilization. 3 tsunamis: the ecological and climatic peril that promises a nightmare for billions of people. Second, the peril on democracy at a time of fake news and community silo, a real, as you said, a real concert of the internet. And the third, the peril of artificial intelligence, which is the machine learning and big data. It is a digital genius out of its bottle, susceptible to escape our control. Please welcome on stage Tan Nguyen.
Hello, everybody. Very happy to be here. And I'd like to start with a question to you. The topic is living together in 2050. So who believes that in 2050 life would be better? Please raise your hands. 1/3, I would say. Okay. Now, a second question for you. Have you ever pictured yourself personally in 2050? That is, in 30 years from now. If you have, please raise your hands. Okay. 10 people. Please come and see me after the end of the conference. The point is, I think it's a very stupid question, so to speak, because 30 years from now, you'll be 50 years old, right? So can you really imagine yourself, 50 years old, gray hair, maybe some belly and so on? I personally couldn't do that. But the funny thing is, when I was preparing the conference, I was telling myself, well, I'm 52 now. So right now, I could be actually in your shoes 30 years ago, except I was sitting in the École des Mines, not in ESSEC. So what I'd like to share with you today is a personal reflection about what does it mean to try and project yourself in 30 years from now. And you will see I have no recipe. I would say that usually I say I'm a permanent startup. My life is an ongoing lab. Okay, so that's what I will try to share with you today. Incidentally, we have a very nice friend here, Naïm, who will make a talk after me. He came from Marseille. He's here. You'll see him after a couple of minutes. And he will tell another story about how you can run your life with joy, lots of enthusiasm, and a lot of sense too. Okay. So let's start. As Xavier said, the first part of my life was, I would say, very classical. I'm 52, as I said. I started with McKinsey & Company. I was the first woman elected partner at 30 years old. And I did the traditional thing that you would do after ESSEC. You go for finance, marketing, you do consulting, you get lots of money, and so on. I did it for 15 years. And then at 36 years old, I got fed up and I quit. That's where my life started to begin to be very interesting. So that's the part I want to develop now. So at 36, it was probably 2002. At that time, the internet was just starting. And I wanted to, at that time, give meaning to my life. So I decided to engage with NGOs. So I started, as usual, with Red Cross, WWF, and so on. And in a very short span of time, I felt it's not going to be enough. It was too slow. It was too old tech. It wasn't, in my sense, impactful enough. So I decided to join the hackers. You know hackers, the guys who do Linux, who do open source. So these guys, actually at that time, were developing what we call Web 2.0. You all know it now. It's wikis, blogs, these kind of things. But you have to know that in 2002, this project seems like utopic, like dreams. People told us, well, are you kidding? Wikipedia is never going to work. How can you do that with volunteers? It's not good enough. It can't work. But today, Wikipedia is the 6th or 7th site in the world, and everybody knows it. So you see, things can move very quickly. So basically, my story is about, as you said, it was to try to combine these technologies of sharing with meaningful projects. So that's what I've done for 15 years. So now I will illustrate this thing and explain a bit of what is the model behind it. So here you have an example of this notion of sharing and, providing ideas freely for everybody. Here you have what we call sustainable territories. So maybe you can check on the internet, but to make it short, you have lots of eco-towns. Eco-towns mean these places where you have ecological footprint reduced by half, and people try to live in a sustainable way. Here you have a place in the north of France, which is probably the worst place to be in the world, basically. People there, 7,500 inhabitants, they're so poor that half of the people don't pay taxes. And this city, you can see it's the mining industry. I think you can see it. This black thing here, it's the mining, is a symbol of the mining industry. So what we have here is a city that really went down when the mining industry went down. 200,000 people lost their jobs, so they had to reinvent everything. So I crossed these guys in 2002, and I felt, wow, if I could do with them the same thing that we did with Wikipedia, let's go and repair this territory, but make it an open source community so that everybody can learn from that. So we started in 2002. The mayor, by the way, is an Ironman. So it means he does a triathlon, this kind of sports. So he's very well known in the world now. But when we started in 2002, it was even worse than Wikipedia. People told us, you're dreaming. How can this place become a sustainable demonstrator? No way. It's dirty, it's poor, but we did it. If you want to have more information, we can provide everything. Now it's the national demonstrator for ADEME of sustainable lifestyles. People fly in from South Africa, Brazil, China by thousands just to see what happened there. We made movies on this, and this is an interesting story about reinventing somebody from repairing a territory from nowhere, from scratch. Another example of this sharing mentality is the sharing economy. I guess you're all familiar with BlaBlaCar, car sharing, Airbnb. What you may know is that in 2008, this movement started because of economic reasons. Basically, because of the crisis, people couldn't buy a car, couldn't buy a house. They had to rent it, and they had to share it. It was for very pragmatic reasons. So the sharing economy took off in 2008, and I was, at that time, incubating people like WeShare, maybe these guys. It was a student like you, actually, in 2011, from École des Mines, Grande École de Management de Lyon, Antonin Léonard. Ticket for Change, one of my students from HEC. It was 2014. Now he has gone Ashoka Fellow. He earned 500,000 euros from Google. All these guys have succeeded in doing sharing for a better world. I can tell you 40 stories like that of students of mine from HEC, Subdeco Paris, who became these inventors of a new way of living. And the key point here I want to get across is that you can do your own startup, but then think about transmitting what you do so that you have more impact. So that's what all these stories are about. We're going to talk about makers now as well. Another example of this sharing idea is the Learning Society with François Tadei. I guess everybody in the education industry know him. He's the guy who just wrote a report on how to change our educational system. So François Tadei, on the left-hand side here, is a researcher who decided to create a Center of Interdisciplinary Research, the CRI, which basically has no teacher, no researchers, there are only students, and everybody becomes student and teacher at the same time. So from nothing in 2005, it has grown into the best place to be, I would say, in the world. We have partnerships with Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Tsinghua, whomever you want. It's all about open source research and open source education. And this place is really fantastic. We'll talk about it later. Basically, what they do is they have students like you, and we work on challenges addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. So whatever you find, you put into an open commons, you share the recipes with others. So each time you do something, the rest of the community will learn and grow from that experience. So, for example, they have so many startups now, like tens of them since I joined in 2002, so 6 years ago. We have, I think, 40, 50 startups in China, in the rest of the world, in India, in Vietnam. And these guys, they do open source on autism, on cancer, on whatever, you just name it. We have students working on this way of exploring, learning by doing, and sharing their recipes afterwards. Now, the crazy toad. That's the translation of Le Crapaud Fou. So, the crazy toad, you can see it on the top, on the right. If you take a look, you see what he has on his head, right? I tried to find the translation. It's apparently toilet sucker. I'm sorry, I couldn't find this ventouse. C'est la ventouse des WC. And I drew it one evening after some bottle of wines. My idea was to say we need to open up the minds of the people. Why don't people move into these kind of inventions who are so meaningful? It's because they believe they can't make it. So let's try to invent some sort of a meme, a funny animal that will trigger your mind and say, yes, you can do something. So the crazy toad is the idea that the deviant can save the species. You have to know that in nature, toads, actually, they don't live in a pond. They live on the ground. But once in a year, every year, actually, they go to mate, they go to the pond. So you can see all the toads going to the pond. And if there is a road in between, what happens? They all get crushed by cars, right? So the ecologists in France asked that under each road, there is a tunnel. We call it crapauduc, like viaduc. It's a tunnel for them to try and survive when they go mating. But the point is, who are the crazy ones who find the tunnels? So that was the idea of we are the crazy toads looking for the tunnels, and we will say to our friends, hey guy, come here, that's the tunnel. Let's go this way, not on top of the road. So here you have the first crazy toad with me. It's Cédric Villani. I guess you know him. It's the French mathematician who got the Fields Medal in 2010. It's like a Nobel Prize in mathematics. But the funny thing is that, and that's a funny point with Xavier here, on the top of the screen, you can see a kid sitting on a musical instrument, and this guy is actually blind and autistic. And what happens here is that we worked with Cedric on a project on musical instruments to help autistic kids to find ways to liberate themselves. So we have now thousands of kids who went through the program, thousands of workshops in France, in Tokyo, in Amsterdam, and it has amazing results because we empower the people, we empower autistic kids, and we show that they are not just like refuse or just like waste. They can really be human beings as well. But you have to give them the conditions to be empowered. So we were actually here discussing the results of our research, and that's where I met Xavier Pavie for the first time in La Défense. They came with, I think, 80 people from the EXED education program, something like that. And we were discussing around this machine. You can remember when you hit it, it makes music. So this thing is very interesting because it can be used for medical open source research. We have tons of data now about the way they behave and so on and so on. So anyway, Crazy Toad, at the end of this workshop on empowerment, an editor came to me and said, wow, you're a very crazy, amazing team. You are a tandem. You should go together to invent a new future, Cedric and you, Tan. Because on one side, you have Cedric with his bright mind, mathematicians, etc., etc. And the other side, you have myself, I would say, building startups, making incubators, And he said, why don't you get together to try and find the tunnels to accelerate the change for humanity? So that was the challenge, a big one, yes. So the next day, we were sitting together, and Cedric told me, you're crazy, Tan, totally crazy, you're mad. How can we, the two of us, change the future of humanity? We have no clue. We have not even a beginning of, we have no funding, we have nothing. So we said, okay, let's go this way. The point is not, do we need more reports? Do we need more money? The point is, why don't people get their acts together? Why do people just sit there and just wait for the tsunamis to come in? There is something else. It's about imagination. It's about the way they picture their lives in the future. So he said to me, let's assume that there is a tsunami. If there is a tsunami, everybody is going to move their ass, right? So why don't we take a very simple perspective and make sure that people get the message across in a very funny way? And that was the beginning of the story of the Crazy Toad. So I started with him. Initially, he gave me 80 names of the best minds on the planet. I called them all on Skype, and it was very interesting. But initially, we thought the main tsunami was ecological. But what happened was the next day, I was in San Francisco working with my startups. And what happened? Remember, it was end 2016. And Trump was elected. So suddenly, something just broke down. In the room, I had 50 startups. They all were crying. And nobody understood what had happened. So with my hackers, we came back to, the real source of information. And we found Breitbart News. We found Cambridge Analytica. 2 years ago, already, we knew it. We knew what was happening on the planet. So this is in the book. 2 years before, it was published in the news. So Breitbart, you may know, it's Steve Bannon, number 2 of Trump. It's extreme right, racist, whatever you want. It's an agency that produces fake news by the ton. And they provide so much fake news that nobody can tell it's just bullshit. And then you have Cambridge Analytica, you know about this one. They make very precise big data to know exactly what you may not want. You may be, you may fear to lose your job. You may not like gays, or you don't like Muslim, whatever. And they find the exact fake news for you to say, okay, after all, Trump is not that bad. So all this led to what you know. And we had the same starting to arrive in France at that time, because it was just before the French election. So at that time, Cedric said to me, I have to move into politics. Sorry, bye-bye. Go on with your toads, but I can't help you anymore. So he just stepped off and went into politics. The third tsunami that we found was talking to these scientists on big data and AI, artificial intelligence. Very quickly, I came to something very struggling. I don't know if you noticed that in 2016, at the end of the year, Google moved into deep learning. It was the moment where the industry totally shifted into something very, very new. Before, you had a very classical way of doing AI, I would say very slow. This one is different. I don't have the time to explain. But let's say that you went from, I would say, the old traditional way to the STEAM. It's like, it's a quantum leap. So basically what it does, it's big data. You have machines who can swallow as much data as they want. They will make computational statistics, and they will know what you may want or may prefer without even understanding what it means. So just by statistics, they can predict everything you do. If you have your face on pictures, you have your friends around it, etc., etc. With 64 hints, they know exactly everything about you. Okay? So when you have these kind of tools on the table of everyone, the question becomes, what is the big data that these machines are swallowing? Because who controls the data controls AI and controls society. It's Putin who said it. So with Cedric, we said, wow, it's getting very serious now, because it's not only US, it's China, it's Israel, it's our Saudi, it's everybody can do that. Even a master like you, with 2 computers, you can do your big data programs. It's very easy. So we started to say, okay, we have to take care of that third tsunami. And that's how we ended up with the Crazy Toad. So what I did was, I think it was in April, in 2017, we gathered 34 people, like Ticket for Change, WeShare, but also the founders of Europe, data scientists, the best people I could find, for 1 full week seminar. And together we wrote the manifesto of the Crazy Toad. So this book is basically, it's not a book. It's actually a real inquiry on what's going on the planet. And we made it like a dummy, I would say AI for dummies. It's very simple. It's a call for action for everyone. And it's designed to go on TV and to talk to everybody without having Bac plus 5. Okay, so that's the story I'm going to explain with a few examples now. So first of all, when the book was published, it was October 2017, like 18 months ago now. We had very quickly TV shows and lots of, I would say, day-to-day discussions with people in, baker shop, in schools, in universities. And people were like discovering suddenly the Cambridge Analytica story, the AI and so on. So we had momentum, and here for the French, you can see Auchan, all these big names. It's the family, Mullier family. It's 650,000 people. They have really started to engage with Crazy Toads. We have other companies like Engie, you know Engie, McKinsey, of course. So we started to really try to get all the people around the table to make sure that we would have a way to provide the best we could into this civilization pack. So this thing is an open source book. It's designed so that every experience can be shared with others. We have lots of tools, digital tools. We have lots of coaches. We have lots of volunteers. Like today, we have 105,000 of them in 18 months. And we have 120,000 people who are following us. So I'm going now to give you an example, a very concrete example, before leaving it to Naim. Here you have, I would say, probably the most intriguing change of paradigm that I've ever seen since the last 15 years. It's basically a maker. On top is David Lee, in black and white. David Lee is the founder and director of the Shenzhen Open Innovation Lab, which is linked to the CRI of François Dadi. And basically, David Lee was initially, he says, I'm a cyberpunk, because basically he was a free software developer. And in 2004, he found out that you cannot free software if you don't control the machines, because it's a smartphone who controls you. You know that when it breaks down, you have to pay to repair, and you can't really control what is going on with the machine. So he said to himself in 2004, I'm going to create my first makerspace in Shenzhen, because I want to open all this Internet of Things, all this IoT that is around us. I want to be able to open it and see what is inside the machine. So I want to free hardware. So this is what I'm going to tell you now. On the bottom on the right here, it's where I met him. Here we are in Nouméa, in New Caledonia. We were actually working on drones and rovers, you know, these machines who can fly or go in the water. And with David Lee, he managed to open these machines and sell them for less than 1,000 euros. You can have something which is totally repairable, that everybody from 13 years old to 80 years old can repair and play around with. So it's the spirit of having tools that are simple and can be repaired. And I show you also the example of smartphones. So first of all, you have to understand that everything that is electronic today, 90% of the spare parts come from Shenzhen, which is just mind-boggling when you think about it. Everything that you have on your hands here, 90% comes from that place. So 15 years ago, when China took over Hong Kong, at that time, Shenzhen was just a fisherman village with 100,000 people living there. Today, it's 15 million people living from this mass production market. It's just amazing. But the point is you have two choices. Either you go there and you buy stuff, at the end you have an iPhone for 600 euros, and you can't control a machine. We call that in France obsolescence accélérée, because it's going to fail, break down, and you can't repair. Or you go the other way around. You go to David Lee, to his makerspace. You look at the recipes, you talk to the community, the open source developers, and you start doing your own smartphone. At the end, you have something which is between 50 euros and 200 euros. So that's the different way to go. It's your choice. I give you an example. Of course, what David Lee did was lots of hackathons. I guess you're all familiar with hackathons, right? These contests were for 1 or 2 days over a weekend. You have a challenge, and you have to develop something, and you return the recipes to the communities, basically. So they did it on smartphones, and here you have lots of applications. The most funny one is the one in the middle of the picture. It's a smartphone with 7 phones, 7, how do you call that? Enceinte, amplifiers. And the thing is, it was designed for fun, to make music. And this thing became the most sold tool for the building industry. Because on the construction works, you have lots of noise. So when you have this kind of thing, you can actually talk to your workers all around the place. So this thing, which was designed initially by 2 students, now has become, I would say, the hit in terms of sales, and it's a very profitable business now, and it's repairable. Another example of what David Lee did was this one. He also wanted to help people in rural areas. So here you are in the Chinese village. Usually a Chinese village is 40,000 people. And these guys had very barely electricity and no commerce at all. So what they did was e-commerce experiments. And in 5 years, from 2013 to 2018, the Taobao village experiment grew from 15 villages with like 2 million euros turnover to 3,200 villages today, which are applying the same recipe. So basically what the guys did here, they learned to do e-commerce, then they do small furniture, some food, local industries, and they sell it online, and they learn how to produce a brand, how to talk to your customers, and so on. So on average, these villages now, they produce like 2 million euros revenue, and some of the biggest ones produce 90 million, from a place where there was nothing at all. Today, 40% of e-commerce in China comes from these places. David Lee, I call him Robin Hood because he wants to open everything and provide access to technology to everybody. So here he went to a prison in Nairobi, in Kenya, and he did the same with the women in prison. So today these women, they do smartphones, battery tanks, and they have their own local brand, telling the story of I am in jail because I was raped and stuff like that, and you can help me by buying my stuff. And I provide to you with lots of, additional, I would say, customized elements, so you have a story to tell about your tool. So now they have become, I would say, one of the market leaders in Africa with many things, including these headphones. So interesting story from nowhere. You can really rebuild everything. This one also is another example of what we call AI for all and useful innovation. It's Berlin, Germany, refugee camp. Initially, there was a startup coming to Shenzhen, talking to David Lee, and they wanted to have a very expensive translation tool with native language and so on and so on. It would cost by the million euros. So David said, well, it's too complicated. Let's take just a Bose headphone. Let's go to the refugee camp. Let's take a Python programmer, and I'm going to talk to the refugee women. So all the women came into the group. They had the Bose headphones, and they were just translating to the machine. And in less than a couple of days, the machine was much better than the other one from the VCs. And the whole experiment cost only 3,000 euros, including the flight from David Lee. So you can see that you can do very simple tools and very useful technologies without huge investments, in AI and so on. And this is more like a model, but basically the way it works in Shenzhen and the way we want to make it work in our project that I'm going to talk about now is you come with ideas, like you want to make a smartphone. Then in the ecosystem in Shenzhen, you can see here the many things you find on spot. You have thousands of startups there. So either you just buy a white label and you put your brand on top, or you go for, here are 2 names of electronic watches. You can buy them as well and rebrand them. Or you want to work on the assembler, or you can have solution houses, you can have printed circuit boards, you can have everything. So you just go there with your ideas, you choose the team, in less than a couple of days, you have your startup team put together, and you go for it. Either open source like David, or patented, private, it's your choice. But the experience, he made research and PhDs on this thing, shows that this model, when it's open, is way more efficient, because it's the user who's going to improve the tool that you sell him. I'll give you an example here. It's a guy, you can see him on the left. It's a Chinese guy from rural areas. In less than 6 months, he developed this small pad, you can see here. And when you put this on the screen, it becomes a computer. So now you can see 80,000 units sold in 1 year. And in France, you have Wiko, the phone company from Marseille. They came in spring, and by Christmas, they had their phones. So today, you can buy Wikos from 50 euros to 200 euros. Of course, you need to be willing to tinker a bit, but if you want to, you can have your Wiko for life without any problem. I will finish with now what we've been starting in France. I told you we have thousands of followers now. We took David Lee for a road trip last year. I took him twice in France. And we spent time with students. Here you can see college people. This thing is a robot that can weed gardens. Because you know when you do organic food, 2/3 of the time you have to weed plants. It's very tiring. So this machine, this robot, it does it for you. And you can have the expensive version that comes from Lausanne Incubator, 15,000 euros. It has lots of signals and recognition. You can see it on the screen here. Or you can have the other version done by college people, college students. It basically takes a smartphone, takes pictures, comes back. Then you tell him, take away this weed, not this one, not this one. And you train the machine. And the college kids did it. In a few days, the machine was working more efficiently than the other. And it cost only 1,500 euros. So you can see again the same difference. Kids teaching the machine. It's much more efficient than having the machine doing everything for you. Same story with cars. This is the last invention from David Lee. He hacked the car industry. You know that when you buy a Tesla today, a Tesla would cost 50,000 to 100,000 euros. It has a range of 650 kilometers. It weighs 2 tons, 2 tons and a half. For only one person whose weight is 75 kilos, so it doesn't make any sense to have such a huge tank just to run on the streets, right? So same story. David simplified the machine. He drove it down to 5 components that you can see here with the external parts on top. And this kit costs only 1,000 euros. So you go from 50,000 to 1,000. You can see the difference. Then we started to design these things with the Millier family in tech shops with Leroy Merlin and so on. So we're trying to have fun with the external part of the car. We invent new cars with the 2 chevaux and stuff like that. And the idea is to have the internal part, which is very easy to repair. The machine weighs only 450 kilos and can have 250 kilometers of autonomy. So it's another way of looking at the car industry. So again, the same example. A community working together on the recipes, right to repair, and then you have something which is much less expensive and that everybody can work with. So to finish with David Lee, we went on TV in June. Here it's France 3 TV. And the message that David is really trying to put across is that the real good AI is not going to come from Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. It has to come from the street corner. So all the things I showed you is the proof that everybody in the street can make things. Once somebody finds the code source or the very first kit, then everybody can play around with the tool. So that's basically the idea of the right to repair. He's done it for us. We just need to take the kits and we can develop them in France. So that's the idea of the right to repair paradigm. So to finish with, we have in France something called the PIC, Plan d'investissement dans les compétences. What? Ah, so yeah, actually, name is over there with the Mickey Mouse. Anyway, you'll see him later. So PIC is a project which is 15 billion euros investment to try and improve the skills of the less privileged people in France. So one part of that project is called 100% inclusion. It's supposed to help the not educated, employed or trained. So that means people who are drop out, who don't have jobs, women at home and stuff like that. So these people, we have 240 million euros investment, and we decided together with David Lee and with other people to respond to this project. So, sorry. It doesn't go back. Yes. So we call it right to repair. And basically what we do is to say we're going to take between 300 to 1,500 needs, these privileged people, and we try to send them into this kind of trajectory, like the one you saw through David Lee. Okay, so we want to get them into smartphones, on battery tanks, on cars, on robots, and so on everything that has a bit of electronics. But we also want to open it to, we discussed with Tamara just before, we want to open with theater, music, like the projects with handicapped people I showed you before. Everything that is empowerment and has a bit of technology in it, we want to open source it and make it available so that it can design jobs, create activity, and provide, I would say, some economic returns for the people. So that's basically the project. I can tell you more afterwards if you want. Next, Naim will talk about this example. His startup, Synergy Family, is a very interesting case of a dropout who actually managed to become serial entrepreneurs. So I think that's the crusty part of the show. He's going to tell you about his own story. So just to finish, going back to who can picture yourself or herself or himself in 30 years' time, it just happens that when I published the book of The Crazy Toad, at the same time, the Dalai Lama published his book called A Call for Revolution. And this book is really addressed to all the youth from the planet, so it includes you. And it says, basically, you are the generation, you are the only generation that can make change happen. Why? Because us, the old guys, we are too late. You are going to be in it from 20 to 50 years old. You're going to be right in the middle of it. You're going to be active. You'll have the choice to change things or to submit and to just go on passively. It's really your call, your choice. So for me, it was interesting to finish with that, I would say, un clin d'œil. Maybe on this picture, you can see Dalai Lama. You can see myself on his knee. And it was just last November. And just 1 month ago, we were with this guy. He's 83 years old. And he was almost desperate. He was telling me, actually, Tibetans are going to die. At this point, this is a genocide, right? He told me the only hope we have is that people understand the message. We need the young people to become active and to take care of the planet, take care of themselves, and become, I would say, learning experiments. When I told you I'm a startup, you can see me on top right. I'm here training on free diving, deep free diving, you know, Grand Bleu, stuff like that, 50 meters. The best people go to 126 meters. I would say myself, I'm just 45, but I'm happy to go deeper. Then you have other experiments in Vietnam. Here's something we do in monasteries with AI, with orphans in India, you know. So you can try almost everything. My only message to you is for those who said you can picture yourself in 30 years' time, I'd be interested to talk to you, see what you have in mind. But I can tell you only one thing. When I started at 20 years old on the École des Mines, I had no clue what my future would be. The only thing I know for sure now is that you have to be a learning experiment. You have to try, fail fast if possible, and try again. But the most important thing is to learn from everything you live through and you share it. If you have community traction, you're going to be saved. You have to be with other people to share and not be by yourself. So that's probably the main experiment I took away from experience I took away from open source communities, is that by sharing with others in times of scarcity is the only way to get through the hard times that are going to happen. I think that's it. So. So now I would like to introduce Naim, or do you need me to introduce you? No.
Hello. I'm a bit shy because I'm in front of the elite of the nation, international elite. No, I'm joking, of course. No, in fact, I'm shy because, believe me, when you stand beside Tan and you have to speak about your story, you feel very small. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a few words about me and my startup. My name is Naim. I actually stopped following school from 15 years old onwards. And I did a lot of bullshit, sorry about the words, until 24. I won't tell what I did, but the best stuff I did during this period was rap music. The rest was rather illegal sometimes, and I won't say anything about it right now. But I met adults that give me my chance and emphasized on my talents, and eventually I went back to school, passed my A-level by myself while working besides. I went to law school. I was terrorized when I entered the first year in law school because I didn't believe I was able to go there. To make it quick, I had my path, a normal path in the law school while working in order to finance my studies. International business law, I went to England. Meanwhile, I was very involved in associative activities, non-profit activities, in many associations, in sports. I was helping youth in difficulties, etc., etc. And I went to Asia. I came back. I wanted to be a lawyer. I taught law at school. And then I had the opportunity to go in Airbus Helicopters. It's a subsidiary of Airbus selling helicopters, where I did business for a few years. It was an amazing experience because I travel all around the world selling and negotiating helicopters. And I founded 2 or 3 startups, big failures, but a lot of learning about that. I have 1 startup right now besides my job in Synergy Family. Last year, I was in Airbus Helicopter, very comfortable, in a path that maybe some of you will follow, probably. Good salary, I was identified talent, I was having opportunities. I decided to cut 1 year and I did an executive MBA. I followed this executive MBA for 1 year. At the beginning, I was thinking that I was not able to manage, but eventually I managed to be major in this executive MBA, so I was quite proud of myself. But the point is not to tell you my CV, because it's absolutely not relevant, especially besides what Tan did in her life. The point is to tell that during this year, I decided to stop my career and to quit Airbus Helicopters and this comfort, and I joined Synergy Family. Synergy Family, if I just can give you one message about my path, because the time is short and I won't be long, is I think Imagination Week is all about transdisciplinarism. And I think this is very important to learn a lot of things. So I learned business, I learned law, I learned a lot of things during my experiences. But what really bring me power in what I'm doing now is my dark CV. It's all the small jobs I did, all the experience as a volunteer, and all those cumulated. Every time I solve an issue, I innovate. It's based on this material that I managed to do so. It's not at all my diploma. So Synergy Family, a few words about that. It's a crazy story. Some crazy people. I met them during the year, deciding to join here. Now I'm director of the social innovation and the communication of this company. They pass from 2 persons to 150 people in 3 years, from 20 or 30,000 turnover to 3.5 million. And I will just give you a few words about that. We take care of vulnerable people in Marseille and in Paris. Vulnerable socially speaking, to make it large. And we have, let's say, 2 secrets that I will reveal to you right now. First of all, we do what I call quantum social action. So I'm not sure you are familiar with quantum physics principles. No, I don't think so. I'm not a scientist, but just to let you know that in quantum physics, a particle exists only if you observe it. And what we decide to do, when we see vulnerable people, we decide to ignore their problem. We don't see their issues. We see broken people in front of us, but we don't see that. We see only their talent, their dreams, what they can do, and what they have done in the past that is positive, and we put the finger on that until they use that force to get out from their problems. So this is our philosophy. Second secret, it's about innovation and imagination. And it's a lot linked to what the Krapofu and David Lee and Tan did. It's what I call the couscous method of innovation. So it's a bit early to eat couscous, right? What time is it? Yeah, a bit early. But I guess all of you eat couscous, so remember that. And I make it quick. in Airbus Helicopter, I was working with people from the best business school and the best engineering school. And I noticed that their pattern, when they want to innovate, let's imagine they feel like to eat a couscous. It's 11:30. They decide to have a couscous project. So they go online, they get the recipe, they get the ingredients, they take the budget, and they go out. They go in all the shops to buy the ingredient. But what happens in reality when you innovate this way, when you want to have a project this way? You don't find the ingredient, the shops are closed, you come back, eventually it's your first couscous, so you fail it, and you eat at 1:30, you are not even hungry anymore, and the couscous is not good. So my method and Synergy Family method is the following. When you want to eat a couscous, the first stuff you have to do is open the fridge. It's David Lee philosophy. Open your fridge. There you will find some vegetable. Then you go upstairs and you go knock the door of your neighbor, Geneviève, Fatima, whoever, and you ask her if she has the experience to do a couscous. And eventually, you will finish by eating a tabouleh or something else. I guess I make some of you hungry right now. Eating a tabouleh, but you will eat with Geneviève and Fatima. You will be happy. You will create another thing that the project you had in mind, but it's fine this way. So this is a bit the way we innovate in the social field. And just to close, because I think the time is running, I tease you when I say elite of the society, but I am a bit scared of you. I am really scared of you. You guys are scary, and let me tell you why. She asked you the question, how you envision yourself in 30 years. I think half of this room might be the issue for the planet. And for my daughter, I have a daughter, she's 5 years old, she just got 5 years old. So half of this amphitheater will be destroying the planet. But besides scaring me, I also have hope in you, because I think the other half might be the solution. So if you do like Tan at a certain moment of your career, and you see that there is no meaning in what you are doing when you do business, you make money, you have cars, you have houses, fine. But if you can, at a certain moment, deviate like the crazy Todd, that will be the solution. Be part of the solution. That's my message. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for both of you for sharing your experience. I would like to call on stage some students for the question. So if you want to join us, please on stage. Please, thank you very much for it.
So my question is related to the sustainable development part. The major proportion of the world's population lives in the small cities in developing countries. Now, these people don't have access to good food or clean water, so they're not sure about making it to the next year. So how do we sensitize these people about this problem, sustainable development, which might affect them in the next 15, 20 years when they're not even sure about living through the next year?
To make a very short answer, I would say the only way is, in my mind, empowerment and community solutions. So what I did for the first 15 years with the northern city that you saw, the first picture, is an example of the worst place in France to be, I would say. So basically, what we found for 15 years with all these pioneering projects is that people in very poor areas have lots of astute ways to find solutions if you just give them a little bit of a small kit or something to start with. So you don't have to sell them expensive solutions like water treatment plants, stuff like that. You have to give them very simple tools that they can repair and that they can use on a day-to-day basis. So when I was working with Suez Ondeo as a managing director, actually I was in charge of development strategy incubator. We did 15 experiments in Manaus, Jakarta, Casablanca, La Paz, Manila. We used to work with thousands of poor people. We made the proof of concept that it was working because we gave them the power to repair their own water treatment, to have their own, sewage, they have their own food, and they get all the local circular economy. So actually the proof is that these guys manage much better than the ones in rich countries, but you need to provide them with the initial kit. That's what David is doing. I think it's a very important question. At the moment, I joined the Suez Foundation as a board member, and we are really working on trying to design very low cost, accessible to everyone, so that everybody can become part of the solution, as you said.
Hello. First of all, thank you both for your speeches. It was truly inspiring. Ma'am, I want to talk to you about one of the dangers that you had mentioned, one of the 3 perils. You mentioned artificial intelligence and machine learning as one of the great perils of the future. Ma'am, I'm someone whose main domain of work is revolved around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And for someone like me, it is impossible to think of artificial intelligence as a danger, because I can only see it as something which can grow, something which can help humanity. And when I look around the world today, I see this sentiment of artificial intelligence being a danger shared by many people, almost everyone, in fact. They think that it is something which will harm humanity in the future. And this is something which is actually harming the development of artificial intelligence, because as you see, data regulation is at a high at this point. And without data, which is the raw material of artificial intelligence, we cannot develop it. Now, we sit here and we talk about living together in 2050. But if data is regulated at this rate, artificial intelligence will not grow, which means technological advancements will stop and humanity will not evolve. And if we don't evolve, we'll die off as a race. So do you think fear, peril, or danger is really the right word to associate with artificial intelligence?
Thank you for the question. I'll try to make a very simplified answer so that everybody get the point. Basically, and Cedric Villani wrote it in his report, AI is like electricity. It's everywhere. It's going to be everywhere. Where you have data, you have AI, right? Everything that has data, you can use it to infer some stuff on it. So that's AI, okay? So the point is that AI is not bad by itself. It's like electricity. Electricity is not bad. It can be good or bad. It depends how you use it. So the main point is to understand that AI is extremely powerful. It's everywhere. And the danger is not AI, it's the fact that people don't understand what it means to have AI. So I would give just 2 examples of risk and 2 examples of very good results. The first thing is, of course, the divide. Some people have understanding, some don't. So, of course, those who know they can make money and so on, and the others, they are just left behind. So I think the divide between the have and have-nots is going to be bigger with AI than with food and electricity. That's one. Second point is that because of the way it is constructed, Cedric Villani told it, actually, and most scientists would say nobody understands how the machine makes their prediction. They just swallow all the data like a toddler, and he learns by doing. He fails, he tries again, he learns, tries again, and then at the end he knows it's a cat, it's your face, it's your aunt, it's somebody else. But he doesn't know it's you. He doesn't know what it means. So the trouble is that we have machines like Digital Genius that we don't understand. And we don't even understand how it starts to pick on our brains. You know, the AlphaGo story, it happened 10 years before we expected. So all these things mean you have a very powerful tool, and who knows, who controls this thing? That's the main point. So now the 2 positive points, of course, is look at health. The things that we can do with e-health and so on is just tremendous. Same with environment. We can do so much better by predicting crops, understanding what's going to happen with this kind of invasion, insects, and so on. So there is lots of good applications to it. My main point is to say, you guys here, 800 people, plus the teachers, you have the brains, you have the money, you have the time, you have all the access to these things. The point is to learn for yourself and then try to train your communities around you. Because we've done experiments now in Africa, in Senegal, working in India, we're working in Vietnam, and people are very eager to learn. So if we provide them with kits like the ones from David Lee, the potential is just infinite. But we have to not let it in the hands of the Silicon Valley VCs only. It's not they are bad, it's just they are pursuing their return on equity objectives. But if all of us empower the people around us, it becomes like electricity. Everybody should be able to know how it works, electricity. Right? Thank you.
Just if I may add, what's your name? Sandal? Okay, nice to meet you, Sandal. I come back to my last point. It depends who you are. Because if you are a specialist of AI, to be honest, that's all the stake of transdisciplinarism, is to understand what's behind the use of the AI in some respect. So if you become the solution, AI will be the solution. If you don't have a vision, if you don't understand why you are working on AI, for which company, what is the purpose behind, or which government, this might be an issue.
Hi, ma'am. First of all, I'd like to thank you for all the work that you're doing. It truly is very inspiring. My question to you is, would it be feasible and ethical to have a collaborative social model incorporating multiple governments to tackle the dissemination of fake news by censoring or regulating social media platforms that connect global citizens?
Personally, I'm not too much on this kind of approach because I think it's very, very, very difficult to get governments together, get them to act together, and you can see today with Trump, Brazil, Eastern Europe, and so on. It's beginning. I think politics are very complicated. So in my mind, it's easier to try and have a movement from civil society without structure, without funding, without all this slow, heavy stuff that you have to move on. But once we would reach 5 to 10% of the people, then you can go to government and say, hey, I'm big enough, so you have to listen to me. Now let's go for some big thing. But anytime you go into COP21, 25, whatever, you spend hours and hours just discussing, negotiating, and I think it's not from that place that change will happen. I think it will move up from empowered citizen, and then if we are good enough on media, hacking also, we need to hack many things, then maybe at some point we'll be able to do something. And maybe the small countries like Quebec, Canada, and some other, even Vietnam, some places like this, people have some free mind to move. France is a very interesting lab with François Taddy and Cédric Villani and many places, ESSEC also. We have lots of French thinkers. You'll see one this afternoon, Dominique Bourg, who used to be one of my very first pioneers 15 years ago. I think we have lots of thinkers in France, and we have the youth that is able to move. Some of my friends in San Francisco told me when I was with them at the moment of the election that everybody was watching France at that moment. They told me the only hope we see on the planet is to see what the French are doing. If the revolution can happen, it can come only from France. And that's why the Dalai Lama wrote his book in French first, with French people, including ourselves. And he's trying to use France as a proof of concept for Europe. And same with David Lee. He came to us because he said, I tried in Germany, no result. I tried in the US, no way. I tried in Canada, too long. And he said, wow, you French, the crazy toads, you are kind of funny guys. Maybe we can do something. And 1 year later, you see these kind of things. And the most amazing thing is to have name here. He didn't say it, but this guy, they managed to have 20% of the Marseille market for social action, which is just amazing when you think it's a bunch of dropouts who used to deal cars and other things you smoke, right? So it's just amazing to say 20% of the market is these guys now. That's why they are in the center of the project I showed you before.
During your presentation, you said it yourself several times, changing the world, saving the humanity, I use your words, is very difficult, especially from the inside. And in your life, you became also partner of McKinsey. But at some point, you left this very specific world to dig new ways, to become a crazy frog. If you are back in your 20s now, I mean, we are all looking for jobs now. If you are back in your 20s now, would you rather directly take this path of craziness, hackings, entrepreneurship, rather than spending 15 years, I think, in 15 years in this industry?
You know, it's difficult to picture yourself differently, I think first of all, I'm very glad to have done all these experiments. And I would say I'm glad to have left after 15 years. The most important thing is not to start with something you learn and fail and try again. So McKinsey was great because it gave me lots of money, reputation, skills, connections. But I think 15 years for me was more than enough. I had to do something else. But today I talk to my colleagues who are now managing partners of the firm and so on. They have millions of revenue each year. And many of them tell me they're not so happy with their lives now. And it's too late for them to change. When you're 50, 60, it's a bit too late. When you're 30, you can still change. 20, 30, you can change. 40, even you can make different moves like Naim did when he quit Airbus. So at the moment, I have interesting discussions with managing directors and CEOs of big companies who tell me, I'd like to step like the crazy toad. What can you help me? So I don't regret what I did. I guess if I hadn't been at McKinsey, I wouldn't be talking here. You would have, what, this crazy frog with this thing on his head, right? So I think you need to have something on your CV, but then you have to make sense of everything you do. I think I failed more than I succeeded, actually. So if there's only one lesson, is when you fail, learn from the failure. So I wouldn't say don't go to McKinsey or do something else. Just do it. But if you fail, do something else.
You allow me to, even if the question is directed to, what's your name?
Sorry?
So what's your name? Valentine, okay. If I may, are you familiar with the Ikigai framework?
Yeah.
Okay. If you have the chance to wonder this question right now, hear some very inspiring people, it's a chance for you because the past generation were, were associating work and suffering. Now our generation is different. We don't see the same way, we want meaning, and we are pain in the, you know what I mean, of the company, because the HR people don't know how to integrate you guys, because now you ask for meaning, so if you wonder this question, I can share you very quickly a funny story. When I decided to quit and announce it in Airbus Helicopter, most of my colleagues had the look of what the hell are you doing, quitting your job and with your with the perspective you have, etc. Most of them, they didn't understand. And discreetly, a lot of them, especially during my last week, came to me and say, Naim, I heard that you are leaving to do social. Really, that's what I do, but I don't know how to do because I have my credit and etc. etc. And I had those discussions very touching with people looking for a way out from this golden jail. And I felt like it's a confirmation I was doing the right choice.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Tan. Thank you, Naim. Thank you, students, for being there.